The MANIA acronym, good. What are some other things you already knew? Got. Good. So the guy who's from the Black Hands killing Archduke Ferdinand. Good. Or some other stuff you already knew. That's good. That means we have a lot to learn. All right. So the MANIA acronym for our class, we're going to use the main acronym. It's basically the same thing. We're going to go through militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. And so today, we're starting with kind of the intro, and we're going to try to get through militarism today. And what do we mean when we say a cause? Because if I say cause and effect, or describe some cause and effects, or something along those lines, you usually think of something and then like there's an effect right after. Well, these four long-term causes aren't really what sparked the war to happen. It wasn't like the American Civil War where it was like the election of 1860 and boom, there was a lot of things leading up to that, and that's kind of what we're looking at with the main acronym. They didn't necessarily make the war happen. That's third bullet point. They increased the probability of war. So probability, that's a statistics term. So it just increased the chances of a war happening with militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. And then we're going to talk about, and the video talked about, a combination of those things is what inevitably led to it. The political cartoon on the right, there's a lot of political cartoons that look like this, where basically it's just a bunch of people in Europe and they're all looking at each other, holding guns to each other's head, and they're like, who's going to be the first one to pull the trigger? I'm not going to talk about this whole slide today. We're going to, don't bother about the slide. We're going to hit everything. So factors of militarism. So when we think of militarism, militarism is building up the military. Imperialism was a big part during the late 1800s, early 1900s, in that people were going out outside of Europe and imperializing different parts of the world. And so part of this, they thought social Darwinism. What is social Darwinism? Or what is Darwinism?
Darwinism is the evolution.
Yeah, it's like the evolution theory.
The strong
Survival.
Yeah, survival of the fittest, the strong survive. So social Darwinism, just think of it as like in a, like put your social studies hat on, not your science hat. But your social studies hat says social Darwinism is like the best of the best. Your race, your ethnic group, your country needs to survive. So we're going to start building up our military, like Ashley said, the strong survive. Like Jock said, the survival of the fittest. We're going to talk a lot about naval power. And this is the same time during the Industrial Revolution. So countries are now producing weapons as quick as they can. It's like an arms race. When we get to the Cold War, we're going to talk about the arms race and the space race, except it's going to be more nuclear after World War II and the end of World War II. But the American Civil War is known as the first modern war. That happens in 1860, and we see all those deaths of the American Civil War. And now we're about to add some technology, add more advanced weapons, add chemical warfare to World War I. So these more deadly weapons as fast as possible. And again, you are trying to outwork your neighbor, because again, It's that survival of the fittest. So how do you maintain your status? If we're talking about survival of the fittest, how can you keep the status quo the same? And it happens with these three things that we've been talking about. Your large empire, your imperialism. The only way you keep that large empire is through your industrialization. And through industrialization, you have your militarism. You're building up your arms race. So this chart right here is kind of the flow chart of how militarism kind of got out of control. Everyone wanted to be the strongest, everyone wanted to be the baddest, everyone had to have the newest, biggest weapons. I'm going to skip this slide. So by 1914, so 1914 is when the war is actually going to start. We're going to get to the start of the war in a few days. But by 1914, Europe was so heavily armed, countries were conscripting. What is when you conscripted military service or compulsory military service? What does that mean? Yeah, it's like a draft. So it means they were forcing their citizens to join the military. And so you have millions now of trained reserve military. And so again, this wasn't like just in 1914, oh, let's start building up our military. No, this has been happening for, I'm not going to say hundreds, but about 40, 50 years before 1914. The military, so you learned in world history of all those medieval wars and the 100-year wars and all that. Well, the militaries of 1914 were bigger and more powerful than any in history. And so let's look at some numbers. Let's look at some specific statistics here. By 1914, there are about 200 Army divisions. Now, how big is a division? Yeah, 12 to 18,000. So, one of you math people, go ahead and do 200. We'll just do on the low side. Do 200 times 12,000. What is it? What is it? 2.4 million? And that's on the low side. What's 18 times 200? 18,000 times 200. 3.6 million. So that's how many military people, army men, that we have. It includes infantry, artillery, logistics, medical. Russia, one thing that Russia is consistent at across history is having a bunch of people. They're going to have the biggest at 1.3 million just in Russia, and they could possibly mobilize another 5 million. Trying to figure out where to stand during lectures if you can't figure that out. I think I like standing here because I can read the Lord better, but I'm also behind you guys, so we'll figure that out later. One of the problems with Russia is that they're so big and they're so spread out, they have to travel long distances and they don't have very good infrastructure. So let's look at some real numbers here, and so you can see kind of the effects of this in this chart. So you can look at Russia on the top, they got the most. You can see the United States is on the bottom. But what is happening very clearly in every single country as we move from 1882 or 1914, what is happening? Yes, the numbers are increased. The numbers of their military are increasing. That means the numbers of weapons are increasing. That means the number of trucks and infrastructure that is needed are increasing. You don't have to write this down, but most statesmen in 1914, if they're not generals, they think that having larger army and navies will actually deter a war. What does deter mean?
Like push off or avoid.
Yeah, like push it off or avoid. So, think for a second. Do you agree or disagree with this belief? Just think about it for a second. So saying that having the larger militaries, having larger weapon supplies is going to avoid a war, is going to push away, is going to deter a war. Think of your opinion. Right. Discuss with one of your neighbors. Do you agree or disagree that more military will decrease a war? You can be a group of 2 or a group of 3.
You gotta take a stand. Stand for
All right, do I have someone that agrees with the statement that bigger military deters or avoids war? Nobody agrees. Scott, you're going to take this one? All right, why do you agree, Scott?
I think it would kind of, like, if you're a different country looking at another country with a larger army, you would kind of avoid, or anything like that, country with a larger army.
Good, so Scott's saying that having the bigger military is going to be like more intimidating to people, I guess, and you're going to be like, all right, Jock, like, don't mess with me. I got a way bigger army than you. Like, just stay where you're at, buddy. You don't want to mess with this. All right. Who wants to take the disagree angle? Who wants to disagree with this? Charles.
So I think that's not necessarily true because Russia, I know they didn't put their soldiers through a lot of training, so a lot of them were just out there having no idea what to expect or anything.
True. Anyone want to add to that, Madison?
Just because there's more people doesn't mean better. It's like playing a sports team. If they have more people, doesn't mean they're any better than you. They just have a lot more people. Well, they all could have no idea what they're doing.
That's true. I like that analogy of a sports team. Anyone else want to add to the disagree? Sammy.
I definitely see both sides, but I'd say that proven through history, the size of the military, and if it pushes it off at all, it's not very much. And it's for other reasons that things get pushed off, like not being economically stable yet, or just not being in the position to fight yet.
Good. So I like Sammy's argument. He's saying if you like having a better military doesn't avoid war, like you're saying there's other causes to a war besides the military, essentially. Anyone else want to add to this?
There was like something in the reading about Ho Chi Minh saying he doesn't care. One of the American men kills 10 of his men. In the end, will still win. Something like that.
Exactly. So there's some leaders and some military leaders who like could really care less about their actual people, and they're just like, we're just going to keep fighting. All right, we're almost done, I promise. So factors of militarism, we talked about this already, but looking more specifically at industrialization. Similar to what Sammy was alluding to in our discussion, the economic power equals military power. At least that's what they thought of in 1914, especially with industrialization. The main need for producing and for industrialization is steel. It's one of the main things, and specifically for like weapons and vehicles and tanks and military supplies is steel. Germany is their natural resources. They are high steel. They are high producers of steel, even still today. The United States, we're probably close second, but Germany's steel production during this time and Germany's industrialization to this time is way, way, way ahead of everyone else. So all these countries like France, Belgium, Austria-Hungary, Russia, where are they? Britain, especially Britain. Where are they getting their steel for industrialization? Now they're getting from Germany. So this is going to create that economic tension because Germany's like, hey, I want to be the most powerful. I want to have the biggest army. I want to have the best stuff. I want to have the best weapons, the best technology. So why? I don't necessarily want to trade steel to you guys. So this economic tension creates diplomatic and political tension. Iron and steel specifically, because these countries, especially Great Britain, what do we know about Great Britain? It is a what? Like the landform.
Island.
It's an island, good. So Great Britain is an island. So they have limited resources. So countries like Great Britain, France, Austria-Hungary, Italy, Russia to a certain extent, Belgium, these smaller European countries, they start looking for new resources. So they're going to Africa, they're going to Southeast Asia, they're going to Australia and New Zealand. They're starting to imperialize, they're starting to spread their empire. If you spread your empire, you need more military to control your empire. So even though Germany does have self-sufficient in iron and self-sufficient in steel, they are not necessarily looking to imperialize as much as the other countries. However, with this imperialization, they're gaining these natural resources. They're gaining iron to produce steel. And so you see an industrial output and strong navies start emerging. What do you see similar to this chart that we saw on the last chart?
They increase.
Yeah, the numbers continually increase, probably with the exception that I see of Great Britain from 1910 to 1914. Everything else, it looks like, is increasing, and this is warship tonnage. So the amount of warships that are being used from each of the countries. Great Britain has always had a good navy because, like we said, they're an island. The United States, we usually have a pretty good navy. Germany, however, you can see Germany, like, I don't even know, like, what you're, like, is that 10 times the size, 100 times the size? They went from 88,000 to over 1 million. I'm not a math person, so you do the math on a percentage increase. But a lot, exactly. Isn't Pritchard's class a good job, dude? Thanks, Pat. Oh, we're almost done. Let's see if we can get through this. I might stop here in a minute. This might be our last slide. Alright, militarism, arms race. So like we said before, looking at more specifically, we're going to stop here. Alright, some things, because there's some things I need to talk about before. for Monday or Tuesday?